EVE Online has a very social universe. Most game elements, the sandbox, is directly affected by the player, not the non-player characters or elements, and not really the game designers either. Corporations and alliances, which are a group of corporations, consist of anywhere from 1 to tens of thousands of players. As discussed in the previous two videos, by this time in my EVE Online career, I was still very much a new player. I had mastered traveling through dangerous parts of low security space while staying safe. I could find rare and valuable treasures in the most remote but harrowing parts of the universe. I could even give a little advice to newer players about being foxy with exploration and treasure hunting. But I was missing something that I desperately wanted. And that thing was danger. I wanted a reputation for being dangerous. I needed teeth, claws, and at that point I was merely an elusive prey, but not a predator by any means. I'm also fiercely independent. New player alliances such as EVE University had too many silly rules. Nullsec alliances such as Goon Swarm seemed to be, well, too mainstream and groupthinkish for me. Pirate alliances had some promise, but would lock me out of high security space due to criminal status, and I needed high security space at that point to sell my treasures. There was an alliance in HighSec, 2 alliances in fact, that had to kill or be killed, and you could do this just about every day. These 2 alliances were perpetually at war with one another by design. These alliances had very few rules and no minimal skill points or qualifications. They were called Red versus Blue, a play on the popular and funny Halo series. I joined Red Federation, who was perpetually at war with the Blue Republic. Their respective headquarters were just a few jumps from each other and located near the biggest trade hub in the universe, Jedha. You could undock and generally get a fight, but most of the fights were near the stations, which might start out with 1 or 2 and then escalate up to 30 on each side. The roaming fleets also formed up when someone was willing to command them, and there were usually about 20 strong, give or take 5 people. The first roaming fleet I joined was a kitchen sink fleet, meaning you can fly whatever you wanted and there was no composition or doctrine plan. I chose the flying wing full of blaster turrets, the Catalyst, a Galente destroyer. Now, I couldn't hear the FC for crap. For some reason, RVB chose to use the EVE voice system, which at present has been discontinued and is obsolete. I found myself figuring out what to do by watching the other ships, where they were aligned, where they were going. As far as I could tell, we were playing some kind of cat and mouse game that would deliver us to the optimal position from which we could smash the opposing Blue Republic fleet. And then there it was, the Blue Fleet, an undulating ball of war targets. My fleet mates sped ahead of me into the storm, and I still couldn't hear the fleet commander's commands. I figured, well, it was time for me to move in. My delay worked to my advantage, however. The Catalyst has a reputation for being very destructive up close, so being fashionably late to the fray allowed the less intimidating, but tankier ships to soak up the enemy fire. I swung my Catalyst into a tight orbit on top of some poor sap and began to take them apart with my blasters. I was barely moving on to the next target when my fleet mates finished mopping up the Blue Fleet stragglers. Apparently, we'd won. GFs, or good fights, went out in the local chat, and I was hooked. From that point on, I would always be a PvP player, at least as a secondary profession. However, I needed lessons. I got some help from a patient fellow with a country accent who regularly trained new pilots in the basics, such as fighting and optimal weapons range, basic fittings of the ship, and other very basic principles. Mind you, none of this is anything compared to what the highly advanced PvP players such as Chesser or Suetonius, which are other YouTubers, know or could teach others by now. But it was enough to make me effective in fleets. I became a part-time explorer during my time with Red vs. Blue. One thing that I found a little difficult though was making friends. I think part of this was because there was never any objectives or goals, not even to get good, because solo fights were rare. Instruction was not something that came easily since there was always conflicting advice, even debates on how to fit a ship. Also, although Red vs. Blue were really into PvP, they were war decked often by other high-sec corporations. Most of the time, they weren't too much of a threat, since both Red and Blue would form a big purple ball and go fight any war targets that invaded the pocket. But in big trade hubs such as Jeddah, the average Red vs. Blue noob was easy pickings indeed. Now also in this form of PvP there was no hunt, not much deception, very little trickery or baiting. None of the outfoxing strategies that are common in low-sec or null-sec, and certainly nothing that I'd experienced in other games such as StarCraft. Surely these kinds of tactics existed in EVE Online. I knew this, but I wasn't finding it at Red vs. Blue. I returned to full-time exploration, but I still wanted some PvP. But I wanted real connections with other players even more, and exploration corps were practically non-existent due to the solo and greedy nature of the exploration profession. I got it in my head that I needed to war deck some innocent mining corporations, but I knew nothing about how industrial corporations worked. It was time to give the industrial sector the old college try. Mining was not something I was going to do. Some sit on a rock for hours and watch movies or play other games, but not me. So I created a trade alt. This trade alt, from the in-character roleplay point of view, would be complementary to the aggressive Maximilian Bonaparte. Eggshen Lopan fancied himself as the kind of guy who laid low and affected things behind the scenes. He projected himself as a kind of cook or peddler of special sauces. My first attempt at joining a mining corporation failed miserably. They went through my past forum posts, my API, my mails, my transactions, my player donations with a fine-tooth comb, and it felt like a pressure interview. All I wanted was to infiltrate their mining corp and kind of learn how they operate, that's all. Later I interviewed with another corp that was warm and welcoming, and although their primary focus was industry, they wanted to do a little bit of everything from missions to exploration and eventually PvP. They were eager to accept my application, me being an experienced exploration player with some PvP skills to boot. So I began my adventures with Bioco Industries. Now Bioco was full of very fun and interesting people. Just as there was a culture of sorts back in RVB, there was a much stronger culture of shared adventure with Bioco Industries. Some were vets, some were noobs, but the goals were never that clear. The camaraderie was strong nevertheless. I still flew mostly on my own and continued with exploration with some light mentoring about trade, but there was a dude who led a rowdy pack of newer pilots into low-sec on a regular basis, doing what they called low-sec exploration. One evening I just happened to be in the same area of low-sec with this playful pack of coyotes, and I was surprised to see that they weren't even using scan probes. Now to me this wasn't exploration at all, just low-sec site running. It became clear that I knew a lot more about the exploration than any of them, even the leader of the pack, Illyria Seed Spawn. Now I didn't take over, but I found myself being followed around. I was finding content for this pack, and sometimes valuable loot, which we divided equally. However, I could sense and read the unintentional hurt feelings I was causing for Illyria. He was no longer the low-sec pack leader, and he admitted this to his CEO at one point, and actually relinquished his exploration officer title. Now I felt bad about this, however, by now not too bad. The real test of a leader is to maintain command even when one of the followers happens to know a little more about something. The leader learns all of those tricks and adapts them as his own. A real leader is happy to have other leaders as followers, but I digress. There was another in this pack that I also considered a leader, not because he knew more, but because of his charming personality. It was a fellow by the name of Two Lots. He was funny, always laughing, and although he no longer plays now, he was a noob by my standards even at that time. He would have a lasting impact on my entire EVE career. We had this little game we would play, where we would link shots of women's backsides in chat. Now most were G-rated, but We would declare the type of booty that we were seeing based on its locale and ambiance. For example, if the environment were the kitchen, it would be kitchen booty, possibly dining room booty. If it were the porch, it might be porch booty or patio booty. If it were in the woods or a hiking trail, it might be outdoor booty, it might be hiking booty, it might be mountain booty. You get the idea. We thought someday we might create a grand booty empire in Eve, since we hunted for booty in Losec. Now later, the corporation was tested. After a brief war deck by what seemed to be just a few random Joes, a fellow joined the corp known as Breeze. Breeze was apparently the bloke who war decked this. At least our CEO, Arya, knew a resource when he saw it, and the newcomer, Breeze, began teaching the Bioco boys his brand of PvP, which was used against the occasional war target. Now none of these high-sec wars were anything we couldn't deal with, until a giant mercenary corp, some would call them griefers, called the Marmite Collective, declared war on us. The war deck had a terrible impact on most of the industrial and trading players in the corp, who were based out of Amar. On one occasion, me and my bud, Two Lots, who was shaping up to be a pretty good PvP player in his own right, listened to this fella who was obsessing about Marmite's kill board. Now this was one of the more industrial-oriented players, and he would look at the kill board and say things like, "I don't think we can fight these people. They've got all kinds of ships like Macarios, Ashimus, Tangus." Eventually, a deal was struck with Marmite, and our CEO, Arya, who was an ace diplomat, negotiated a manufacturing contract with Marmite. Bioco Industries weathered many storms until the CEO began to show some signs of burnout. The first and most debilitating weakness of any CEO is one that cannot often be helped, and that's called absence. Arya would disappear for weeks at a time, and sometimes without that vision, without the goals and empowerment, the divisions began to form in the corp. Many began to disagree with how Bioco's finances were being handled. Arya had hatched a bond scheme of sorts, which he eventually paid out, but he hadn't quite earned the trust of everyone else, and others were more and more drawn to the new PvP FC, Breeze, who would take packs of players such as Two Lot far away from the corporation's home space for various types of PvP content. And then there was me, still exploring and attracting the occasional straggler, but I too was starting to really hunger for more PvP. The corp became less active, split up into different groups, and although Arya practically begged me to stay on, I left and went back to RVB. But at that time, the RVB I returned to was not the RVB I left. It was a time when the best FCs, or fleet commanders, were on the blue side, not the red side. So our fleets were regularly slaughtered by a talented FC by the name of Kikyo. In my opinion, FCs like Kikyo had far outgrown RVB, and probably would have been better off with an elite PvP corp. I left RVB after about a month. Now some remnants of Bioco, the most aggressive, sort of PvP oriented, had gradually gone full-time pirate in the Losec, and had formed their own corporation called Bad Security. Now at this juncture, I felt it was time to experience PvP in a different venue. I'd hoped to find Breeze was still in charge of the splintered pack of PvPers who had left Bioco, but he wasn't. He had gone inactive due to some real-life issues. And the one who had taken over was a fellow by the name of Cubic. Cubic had been a regular and active player back in Bioco, very PvP oriented and very aggressive. Now although Cubic was brilliant, aggressive, and knew his stuff, he's what I like to call the prodigy noob, or someone who has near genius levels of talent but no experience. Although there were some good fleets, the one I experienced were not that great. I think he knew this, so Bad Security later joined up with an alliance that supposedly had many veteran alts. They were called Space Unicorns with Big Horns. However, to everyone's disappointment, these supposed elite PvPers rarely rallied anyone for roams or operations, but tended to hang out in their home system and opportunistically wait for the occasional good target. I also played a little earlier than most at this time. I was at this time playing even more of a European time zone. And there was a corporation that also lived in our home station called Balex, or Balkan Express, and they would permacamp the station, and I died a few times on the undock. So I found myself exploring again, all the while maintaining relations with all of my explorer friends in the exploration chat. I eventually was kicked from bad security for lack of participation. Oh, not a big loss for me. This was fine. At this point, I'd been playing EVE for about a year and a half. I knew low-sec and high-sec exploration fairly well. I had seen both low-sec and high-sec PvP and some null-sec PvP, although not anywhere at the intensity I would later in my career. It was time I would lay the framework to found my own corporation. I would do something that, to my knowledge, had never been done successfully. I would create an exploration corporation, one I could defend if need be, and I had a detailed plan for its success. I wanted to relive the days when I was being followed into low-sec to find loot by a pack of merry coyotes. But first, we needed a name. I remembered my old friend Tulot and tried to get him to come back to EVE, since we used to play the game together with links of booty in a variety of environments. I was unable to get him to come back, but proceeded with the corporation formation anyway. The name of this corporation would be Interstellar Booty Hunters. And don't think for a second that my EVE career had been relatively exciting up to that point, because what I had experienced in Interstellar Booty Hunters could very well be some of the most intense moments I've ever experienced in front of a computer screen. And this will be the topic of my next video. Now, I apologize to you guys for taking a while to release this installment. As you can tell, I've accelerated the pace of events to get closer to the present, which we are nowhere close to even now, but I have to put out content that gets views. So if this kind of storytelling appeals to you, be sure to share, like, and comment so that I can be more motivated to do the next installment. But also, YouTube is not sustainable on its own, so please consider visiting the Patreon page at patreon.com/resurrected. Even a $1 donation will go a long way and will help me do what I love and provide you with more regular content. Until next time, space friends.